Well, now that was the intro. I know it was.
I forgot to put it to remove instead of loop. So I was looping.
Did it loop though? Because I think you
Yes.
might have stopped it in its tracks.
Well, I did stop it, but it was set to loop.
I have good news for you. We
correct
have
thing.
one more opportunity to get this right. Next week, we will record our final video for the spring 2018 semester here in digital production.
Well, there's always so many things to remember.
Many things, many things.
But the loop, yes.
Now, is the loop the default? Because
Yes, it is. That's the problem. It's the default.
See, that explains it.
And I don't know why it's the default, but for some reason it is.
Welcome back, everybody, to the class here. We are in the waning days of the class.
Yeah,
We're,
only two more.
two more.
loop, yes.
Two more of these videos. Yes, now there, see, I can hear. Now we're getting a little feedback in the studio here.
I don't know why it's the default, but for some.
So that's through a headphone jack that was.
I
not
put the wrong headphone.
properly.
I put it in the input instead of the output,
Well, there you go.
which could be a distinct problem.
Okay. So
Yeah.
yes, we have just a little bit of time left here in the semester, and we're wrapping up our examination of Adobe Premiere Pro, the final software tool that we've focused on here this semester.
So what are people going to do during the reading week when we're going to be in Chicago?
During the reading week, well,
For Chicago.
in Chicago, yes, that's right. Well, let's see. We'll have a final week of content in the course. We'll be looking at ethical issues in video production and post-production and distribution. So a few things to think about, both journalistically and also beyond.
Next week.
Next week, yes. Yeah. Well, let's see. No, this is next week, and then that will be the week that we're in.
Right.
So we're recording a few days ahead of schedule here just to make sure we get everything tamped down and ready to rock and roll.
I've been looking at Google Maps, and it looks quite nice. Right where this hotel is, right downtown.
This, of course, being our pending trip to the Windy
Yes.
City as part of the student newsroom, the traveling student newsroom that will cover the 2018 American Copy Editors Society Conference in Chicago. And we have another team meeting tomorrow to practice the whole thing, do a dry run of sorts.
Yeah. And the hotel looks quite nice.
The Palmer House is where we'll be staying and working and cavorting.
It looks quite nice, yes.
It promises to be a good time and a
Well,
lot
you've
of
been
work.
there.
Yeah. Had an opportunity to be there a few weeks ago now.
And you've
for
been to the
another
hotel too,
conference.
right?
Yes, to the hotel, yeah.
And he said it was quite nice.
It's a very popular conference venue, this Palmer House. Yes. Now, it'll be interesting to be on the road producing.
Yeah.
We're going to do photos, video, audio. There's a podcast component to this. I would say a lot of the lessons that we've talked about in the course here will translate to this on-the-road student newsroom. And particularly all the lessons where we were talking about how, you know how things can go wrong? They probably will.
Yes.
And then you've got to be ready to work around those limitations.
I have a feeling there's going to be a distinct. Some people, I have a feeling, may be panicking the first day, or the days before too.
It's possible. It's possible. There could be a bit of anxiety.
Anxiety,
leading up
yes,
to,
yes.
There's a little bit of pressure to perform. Could you grab that
What?
that thing that I have on the ground there? I'd just like to talk about it briefly because, pardon me, I picked it up recently.
What thing?
The tackle box.
The whole thing?
Just the tackle box. This is a new addition to my my video bag. Thank you very much. a little tackle box. And
So are you going fishing?
yes, I'm going fishing for interviews.
Fishing for interviews.
So I've just begun to flesh it out here, but we have little windscreens for the lavalier microphone, clips for the microphone, batteries for the microphone, and an adapter that's in there.
Is the for all this for the lavalier microphone?
All of this for a lavalier microphone.
Although could the windscreens be used on the other lavalier microphones?
They could. I would say that it's not exactly a standard size, but it could fit on a variety of different lavalier microphones, and 3 of them in there. But anyway, one of the experiences that I always have, I'm sure, well, maybe it's not the same for you, but every time I open up my bag and I'm trying to pull things out, I can't figure out where things are. It's a mess. The cables are a mess. And it's a small bag, but nonetheless, it's like opening up a closet and then everything just comes flying out.
Wow.
So I'm trying to bring a little bit of order to my life in the hopes that crises will be averted in Chicago because, oh, a battery? I have one right here.
Yeah, no, that never. My bag is always completely organized.
Completely, right?
I have little labels. No, not at all. It's, in fact, a few times I'll forget things.
Well, that's always a problem when you're on the road.
Now, luckily, yeah, it's a more problem when you're on the road. Luckily, since everything I do is here,
and then you go across.
I can just go across the street, so it's not the end of the world. But technically, one should probably have checklists.
We need pre-flight checklists.
Yes, a checklist is actually probably pretty
very
important
idea. And even things that you're sure you will not forget, put it on the checklist.
Yes.
And then double check yourself just to be sure.
Right. Actually, this happened to me one time when I was a photography assistant in Santa Barbara for a school photographer. He needed a battery. It was a battery for or something like that. And so I drove 20 minutes back to this studio. I forgot the battery or something like that. Because a lot of times it's also important that you'll like forget one piece of a larger set of equipment.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to me. And then I almost got fired because he couldn't use it.
Yeah.
And that was a good learning experience.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you think about it, you could like, it's very easy, like, and again, this happened to me a few days ago. I was doing a photo shoot in the studio, and then I took the SCF card out, copied it, and I left it in the reader, and I went to do another shoot. Now, luckily, I had an SD card because it's a dual. The camera has the dual slots.
Yeah. Yeah, so you still had one.
Yeah, but I mean, and luckily I had it set for RAW files, so everything worked out. But
playing with danger.
It's very easy to forget these little things.
It is, and sometimes it's the cheapest piece of equipment. It's that $5 adapter or plate that brings the whole thing to a screeching halt because you don't have it and you need it.
Yeah. Oh, right. Your plate. It's very easy to forget your tripod plate.
Oh, so easy. Yeah.
You could take it off. You just unscrew it. You put it down, and then you're like, where is it?
Don't get me started about lens caps.
Oh, God. I've lost lens caps, many lens caps, or lens hoods. Lens hood. I lost the lens hood for the Nikon D810. It just... and this happens to everybody, though, I think.
Well, I think a big part of it is best laid plans, but then you get out into the field and things get a little hectic and you're intensely focused on something that does not happen to be keeping track of your lens caps.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times you're rushed to strike everything down and get out of there so that something else can happen.
Or even batteries. I mean, it's very easy to go to an interview with a Zoom H1 with no batteries.
Yeah, or get there and realize the battery's 100% dead. Or
right, so that you always got to have backup batteries.
One bar left, so you don't know. Is it enough? Can I make it through?
I mean, I never go to anything without extra batteries.
And the thing is, as our kits grow, and even as they become modestly complex, and we have maybe a couple audio recorders, different cameras, lights, everything takes different batteries. So
Yes.
not only do you need batteries, but you need that set of batteries and the backups, this other set of batteries and the backups.
And all the chargers.
All the chargers, which are also different. And it becomes a hot, stinking mess before too
It
long.
does, indeed. It does. It does.
But
So you're gonna bring everything to Chicago?
I plan to bring the whole pile there, yeah.
So
Yeah.
now, is this going to be for backup things? Because I was told that we are your central role will be to what did Lorraine say your role is going to be?
I believe my formal title for this trip is the artistic director of the website that the media is going to be
Yes,
posted
yes. Your domain is the website.
Yes.
In
not
addition,
the production stuff. So my intention is to loan it out to one of our esteemed students.
when something will, because something will happen and they'll need something.
I'm sure it will.
I plan to bring the Nikon D810 and also the
D810,
Zoom
yep.
and some of the labs
Couple
and a
of
headphone
layers,
and basically everything that I would.
You're gonna bring a recorder or two?
Yeah. I'm gonna go assuming that basically I'm gonna be a backpack journalist, so
Yeah.
I'll go with
Yeah.
everything that's required.
Yeah.
If it's just in the bag, just in the one backpack that I have.
Yeah. So, in a dramatic sense, maybe you avert disaster by having a checklist, by keeping your gear organized. But even in a mundane sense, just saving time is so important because we've got limited time when we're out on a shoot. And every moment that you're spending rummaging and trying to track something down is a moment that you're not spending thinking about composition or exactly how to get the lighting just right. So I'm all about protecting as much time as possible so I can use it on what really counts, which is setting up an awesome shot, getting great B-roll, working with light in a creative and interesting way, and to the extent possible, putting the equipment and the technical stuff on autopilot.
And what I like about the tackle box there is that it's transparent.
Yes, very good point. They have some that are not, or some that it's kind of like semi-opaque. But to me, it defeats the purpose if you can't see at a glance what's in the box.
No, that's perfect. Yes.
It also comes with dividers, so you can make the compartment smaller or larger if you want to. So it's just large enough to fit that particular type of thing, so everything stays in its own spot. But these little things are so easy to misplace.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
that's the main purpose behind the tackle box. So I'm trying to get myself organized. I know another popular organizational tool is people use ties for their cables. Keep all the cables tidy and tied up. And that's not just for organization, but it's also for ensuring the longevity of the cable
Yes.
and making sure you don't have a malfunction in the middle of something because something was damaged or frayed
Yes.
along the way.
Well, that's a very nice little box. So it,
Well, this is $6 on Amazon, and I have not put it to the use yet. Excuse me, not put it to use yet in the field, but I have high expectations, and I'm hoping I have room in my main bag for it, because things are getting very tight right now in that little bag I use. So. Premiere. We're back talking about Premiere again this week. I have a list of topics.
a list.
A glorious list of things that we have not yet discussed. Now, some of you have a little experience and perhaps you've already done these things, but you may benefit from a little refresher. And then for others, you've probably been thinking, how do I do that in Premiere? And I'm hoping that we have at least one, if not two or three, of the that's that you've been wondering about.
That's
The that's. Yes. For example, titles. how do I create a title? In other words, on-screen text in Premiere. Maybe because I want to have credits, maybe I want to have lower thirds, maybe I want to have a title slide that explains something happening in my film. All of these kinds of on-screen texti can be created using the same tool in Premiere, and so we'll show you how to do that.
Now there are different ways of doing it depending on what version of Premiere you have.
This is true. So we're going to go with a universal option, although where you get to it will be a little different depending on your version of Premiere.
Because even the most recent update, which is only about a week and a half, have new ways of doing it.
Oh, even new ways.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps we can get into that a little bit as well.
Have you updated?
Have I updated? Well, let's just take a quick peek here. Yeah, you know what? I don't think I have. I'm on build 224. So.
Well, if you look in your Creative Cloud, you'll see if there's apps.
Yeah, let's take a quick peek at the old Creative Cloud there. I noticed that Lightroom has been splintered off into 2 versions.
Yes, there's Lightroom Mobile and Lightroom Classic. Oh, we have 3 people watching.
3
Someone else is watching.
In addition to the 2 of us.
In addition, I wonder who this 3rd person could be. Well, this is exciting.
Well, apparently I do have pending updates.
Oh.
And you know what they say, never update in the middle of a live show. Because
no, I would not do that. I would recommend updating. Who is this 3rd person? Hello, 3rd person. Now there's a lot of pressure and expectations.
This is
to be entertaining.
Increase in the viewership right now. Oh my goodness. So we'll talk about titles. We'll talk about keyframing. That's another important skill, I would say, to have.
Yes, that is something that I would like to. I forgot. I definitely would like to show next week.
In your Wednesday night class.
Yes. Keyframing.
Well, our assignment this week in the digital production class is one that you've actually done, I believe, in Advanced Video Photo, which is audio slideshow kind of assignment.
Yes.
So we're going to introduce the idea of keyframing here, and titles, and a few other things.
The Ken Burns effect.
The Ken Burns effect, yes. Yes. Little zooms and pans on our photos to bring them to life. A little bit goes a long way, but we'll show you how to do all that with keyframing. Talk a little bit about making adjustments to our audio, and I wanted to look in particular at the
Essential Sound Panel?
The Essential Sound Panel.
Yes,
thank you. Yes.
That is quite helpful.
Yes.
And the new updates have some things which make it even better.
Well, we'll have to imagine that because build 224. Video effects and transitions. We'll talk a bit about how to apply those, what they are, why you want to know all about them. And finally, we'll talk just a little bit, because there's so much we could say, about working with color.
Lumetri Color.
We'll take a look at Lumetri Color. Yes, everybody's favorite color grading and correction effect in Adobe Premiere. So that is the agenda here for today. Anything else that comes up along the way? We may get a bit wistful about Chicago again and imagine how things will go at the Palmer House. But we'll try to stay on track here. And
it looks very swanky.
Happy hour.
It looked quite swanky.
Yes, it's quite swanky. That's an apt adjective for this hotel.
Very luxurious.
Yes.
Probably expensive too.
Well.
But we will have a small stipend, supposedly.
Yes. I don't know if it's geared toward the federal pay scale or the state or what, but it's a small stipend that we'll have.
Anything is better than nothing.
All right, let's jump into this and talk about building titles in Adobe Premiere Pro. And again, titles are Adobe's way of saying on-screen text. You decide exactly what it is and how it's used, and I do encourage you to be creative because you could come up with all kinds of interesting effects using titles. And there are a couple of things to know in terms of how to build them, how to duplicate them, work with them, modify them, and even animate them. Titles, by the way, I just want to add, because this is true of several things we'll get into today, and in general, several things with Adobe Premiere Pro. You can do it in Premiere Pro, and you can do it well, but past a certain point, if you really want to get fancy, I'm talking Palmer House fancy, you're going to want to switch from Premiere to After Effects, which is a tool that provides a plethora of additional options when it comes to doing post-production effects within our videos.
Although there are some After Effects templates if one were to use the Essential Graphics panel.
In Premiere.
Yes.
The Essential Graphics panel, not to be confused with the Essential Sound panel.
So,
which
because there are those two different ways.
I do have those panels, so I guess I'm not. Well, these have been around since 20.
Yeah, no, that's right. Right. That's been around since the last update. The new update has more templates and more customizability of those templates within Premiere.
It just keeps getting better and better.
Yeah.
Every day it gets better.
Although After Effects is definitely an important program to at least understand the basics of.
Yeah, I agree. We got to get that After Effects course up and running here before too long.
Yeah.
So, how do we create titles? A couple of ways we can do it, depending on whether you're more of a mouse kind of person or a keyboard kind of person. But if you're a mouse person, you would go into your file menu.
Wait, do I switch to the computer?
Let's do the all-important switch, yes. There we go. If you're a mouse kind of person, you'll come into your menu here, you'll go to File, New, and you'll scroll on down until you find something called Legacy Title. Legacy Title is where we create a classic or traditional kind of title in Premiere, available to you regardless of the version, although it's not called Legacy Title in the old versions. It's just called New Title.
That'd be like Premiere 2015 or something like that.
Now, whether you're on an old or a new version, you could use your keyboard to access this amazing feature. And of course, if you're on a Mac, it's going to be Command-T. And on a PC, it'll be Control-T. So I'm more of a keyboard kind of guy, all things considered, because I like to plunk down those keys. Command-T opens up the new title window, and we do have to set a few properties here before we get too far along, including the dimensions of the title, which by default will be inherited by the sequence settings that we're currently using, as well as the time base, the pixel aspect ratio, and we can give a name to our title as well.
Will it be Pierre?
We shall call it Pierre. Everything else we're going to leave exactly as is, and we are going to go ahead and save this. That is when things get interesting, because then the legacy title
we have
window.
I have found out who the number 3 is.
Our mystery third viewer.
Did you get a text?
My phone has been buzzing, yes, but
the third mysterious person begins with an L.
Mystery solved. Well then.
Well,
back into the title, legacy title, creation window here. Couple of things that are really important to note. First and foremost, what we're seeing here is a space that we can use to create our titles, and you can also create basic shapes in this space as well. Lines and circles and squares. Triangles, yes, even triangles. But underneath this, behind it, we are seeing the current active frame of our video. Right now, there's nothing there because our playhead is at the very, very beginning of our video, and technically speaking, there's nothing to show behind it. Beyond that, I have nothing on my timeline, so even if the playhead were in place, we wouldn't have anything to see. So let me begin by dragging some stuff onto the timeline, because a lot of times when we create titles, we want to incorporate them with our footage. We want to add them on top of existing video footage or existing graphics. And so we need to see how it's going to look in context to make all that happen. So let me drag this guy down. And as soon as I do that, we can see here in our title window the current playhead position. And if for some reason we didn't want to see that, we could click off this option, Show Background Video, and that's going to take me back to our default setting there. But 9 times out of 10, you want to see what's behind, because you want to know, again, how this text is going to look in context. Not surprisingly, if I slide this over and move my playhead along, whatever is inside of the program monitor will be reflected inside of the title window as well. So now we can begin thinking about adding our titles. And we can do that, first of all, by making sure that our type tool is active and selected, clicking on the frame here and typing in the text that we want to add. Now, we may be satisfied with the default formatting. If you're not satisfied, if you find yourself yearning for something more, I understand. And I would encourage you to explore a number of title styles that you can use to quickly change a number of properties about this text. You'll find those below the video here, and we can even scroll through and find more. So we've got this guy, for example. Oh, that's kind of nice. And we've got something a little more cartoonish, perhaps. After you've selected one of these presets, one of these defaults, you can come into a number of different properties here. And I mean a number, not just the font family or the size of the font. You can control all kinds of things, including the leading, the kerning, the tracking, and even, and I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what this is, the baseline shift.
I think that is the, like, if you want to have a word that's goes like a superscript or subscript type thing, I think.
Perhaps so. Let's click on
I think if you select one word.
Look at that. So not only could you say, make it super, make it sub, you can say exactly how super or sub you want that text to be. So we can choose a basic style and then we can modify it, or we can just start with the default and modify it to our heart's content. And eventually we're going to be fairly happy with what we've ended up with. After we've added our text, we can of course move it around. And to do that, it's easiest to shift back to our selection tool by clicking on it. And then we can click and drag this guy and change the exact placement of our text. You'll notice as we're moving it around that there are a couple of bounding boxes that are part of the display here. There's an outer one and an inner one, and these represent the
bounding box? Well, you mean if it's a text box or not?
No, I mean the safe.
The safe title zone and the safe safe title zone, and then the one closest to the border is the 10%. So although that's not really used anymore, actually. The one closest to the border was for TVs, back when you were editing for like CRT TVs.
Yeah, which the bezels on those TVs
bezel would be like a 10%. So it would be right. You want to have everything within that outer border, and then the inner border is the generally like for titles and things like that.
Yeah.
But now with computers, screens, monitors, it really actually is completely. It really doesn't matter that terribly much.
No, except
I mean, you don't want to put it to the very edge. You will never want to put it to the very edge, anyways. It wouldn't look right.
It wouldn't look right.
Yeah.
But also, some video players the controls of the video players overlay on top of the video.
That's a good point. So then, actually, but these these safe border areas are not really up to date. That is one issue with Premiere. They're not truly up to date. Because you're absolutely right. There are players that, and these don't account for the players.
Yeah, right. And while the players may have controls at the bottom, they're almost certainly not going to have things on the side. But I would say these are still helpful, particularly the inner one, because it's about aesthetics. And it does not look right when you have text right up against the edges of your video.
Yeah, no, it does not look right.
You want a little padding.
Yeah,
margin.
Padding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like, would that be padding or margins?
Well, it
the
could
box
be,
model.
Yeah, it could be either one. Now we're getting a little bit into this is like what do you call it when the comic books, the worlds kind of cross? It's a crossover?
Crossover.
Now we're getting into crossover territory as far as web publishing is concerned.
HTML.
Yes, and CSS. Yep.
The box model, I do remember that.
The other advantage of having these bounding boxes is simply that it gives you a way of making sure things are set up consistently across your movie. This is the other thing I would highly recommend. In most cases, now there's always exceptions, but in most cases, if you're going to be adding lower thirds, which are names and titles for people talking, you want them showing up in the same spot every time, either on the left or right, but they should be in the same spot.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Can you lower my volume down for 10 seconds? I needed to have a terrible coughing fit.
Lower the volume?
All right.
Okay.
Beg your pardon. We need a cough button.
A what?
A cough button. You know, radio shows, they have the cough button.
Well, I don't think it would peak anyways. It wouldn't become distorted because there is
No, it's just unpleasant to listen to, though.
Although that is interesting. I wonder if it would. It should not, because the compressor should keep it from distorting.
Now, the other thing I want to point out is that we can center our text both horizontally and vertically by using these icons here on the left. We've got our do-to-do and our do-to-do there, so we can get it exactly center if that's what we're looking for. And we can also change what? Well, that's probably enough. We can do some fancy things. You can create paths for your text, which is really kind of cool because you could, for example, have the text curving along a subject's shoulder and hat and looking like the text is kind of part of the scene. It's very interesting. For now, though, let's go ahead and just close this window down and see what the heck we've actually ended up
I think
doing.
a lot of times you can, well, a lot of times in lower thirds you see some kind of box behind the text.
Yeah, yeah, and we can do that from there as well.
Very easy to do.
Yeah, so we'll do that in a moment. Now, at first, things are a little concerning because that thing we were just toiling over is gone, apparently. But fear not, it's actually in our project panel. So, very important lesson here. Our project panel is comprised not only of assets that we are importing, linking in to Premiere, but also things that we create from scratch within Premiere. You brought my mic back up, right? Because I'm making some profound points.
Yes,
right
yes, your mic is back up.
All right, so if we scroll through our project panel, at the very top, we have an object called Pierre. No coincidence, that is exactly what we named that title slide when we created it. And if we double click on it, it opens back up. Remember, very, very important point. That text is not actually tied to this particular frame. It's only showing that frame because that's where our playhead is. And so if I come over to my timeline and I move the playhead, the text is now on top of a completely different frame. This is merely a preview, a little prognostication of how things would look if I were to bring that text onto that moment of the video. So how do I do it? Well, the text is just like any other visual object, just like any other graphics object, and I can click and drag it from the timeline into the, from the project got to check myself there, from the project onto the timeline. And wherever I drag it is where it will appear. By default, text titles in Adobe Premiere last for 5 seconds, but you can change that default, and of course you can also perform trim edits and make this longer or shorter depending on your needs. So we want to make sure that it shows up at the right moment. So maybe right about there is where we want it to begin appearing. And once the frame changes, we probably don't need it to continue on, so we'll set an out point on it, right like that. Now, like any other visual object in Premiere, I can drag this guy on here multiple times, and I can have as many instances of it as I want. And, very important, if I click on any one of these items, I can then go into the Effect Controls panel. And you can do this for any visual content in Premiere. Videos, photos, graphics, and titles. Go into Effect Controls.
Now, is not a lower third typically in the lower third as opposed to the upper third?
Yes, it is. Hence the name, lower third. So perhaps we should rectify that issue as well. My Premiere seems to be acting up here, of course. And I have not been saving as I go, of course. So regrettably, we appear to be hitting a bit of an impasse.
Is it frozen?
Well, it is not beach ball level frozen yet. And you Mac users out there know what I'm talking about. But I can hear the fan kicking in, and I'm clicking and not getting any reaction.
Well, your computer is getting somewhat old.
Well, it is getting up there in age, yes.
And it's only a what? An i5?
It is an i7.
Oh.
It is an i7, but it's a good 3-4 years old.
Oh.
I've lost track.
Yeah.
But it is a, bona fide frozen right now, including, not even Premiere, but the whole thing. Well, that's just a shame. All right. Well, sometimes this happens.
And, so should I switch back to you?
Why don't you switch back? Yes, there's no need to look at this frozen monitor anymore. Well, we don't have a backup computer, I'm afraid. Or do we?
So
no,
you're going to have to...
We don't, do we?
No. Are you going to restart it?
Well, I may restart it. That's not a bad idea. And in that case, we can just talk a little bit more. Talk about the Palmer House a little bit more. Actually, I think what would be great, because the next thing we're going to talk about on this list is keyframing. But while I focus on a little reboot here, why don't you give us a conceptual overview of what keyframing is and why it's a tool that we want to have in our tackle boxes. Our virtual tackle boxes.
The virtual tackle box. Well, I suppose keyframing is a way to animate anything. You can animate, you can have a different variable. So you can change the parameters of any particular variable of audio or video, and at different points, which will create a change from one keyframe to the other keyframe, depending on what the variable is. So if you would like to have photos animate or move, then you could apply keyframes to change the position. And then between those, from one keyframe to the next, you'll see the photo move from one position to the other.
Yeah.
But it can apply to any effect.
Including audio effects.
Including audio, including video effects, including audio effects.
So the key concept behind keyframing is it's a change over time.
A change over time of either one variable or multiple variables.
Yes. Depending on how many keyframes you create, right? Because it can get quite complicated.
Yes,
You
it
can
can get
have
quite complicated.
many dozens of keyframes on a single property or variable, and then other keyframes on a different property or variable.
And that's how 3D modeling works to a certain extent, is by a very complicated set of keyframes to create animation.
And if you're attempting to create something lifelike, very realistic, you need a lot of instructions in terms of how the movement should unfold.
Because between the keyframes, the computer does a process called interpolation. I can never say that word properly. Interpolation, which is a mathematical determining what the values would be between the keyframes as they change.
Yeah. Which is great because that saves a lot of time.
Oh, huge amount of time.
And it makes everything at least somewhat flexible, meaning after you put your keyframes on, you could go back, you can move the keyframes, slide them around if you wanted to extend, elongate, or shrink down an animation. And of course, you can go in keyframe by keyframe and change the corresponding properties. Now, we've just kind of scratched the surface on this whole properties concept. And one thing I really want to reiterate is putting aside keyframing, which is all about changing something over time. If you just want to change the appearance of something or the way something sounds, you do it by modifying its properties. And you do that in Premiere via the Effect Controls panel. There are a couple of properties that I would say you end up changing most of the time. And then there are other properties that on rare occasions you need to fiddle with a bit. But what would you say are some of the most common properties that end up getting modified
for video
Premiere?
Or
well,
audio?
Let's say videos or photos, visual content.
Well, for photos, I would say scale, position,
which is the size, and which can also be controlled either on 2 axes or 1, if I'm not mistaken.
Or the position. You can change the XY coordinates. Position.
The position, yeah.
And opacity.
Opacity, how opaque or transparent something is, yeah.
And for photos, I would say that. Yep. And then for visual, I would say that, like for photos specifically, that'd be the most common ones.
All right. The good news is that we are nearly back up and running here, although I'm going to have to reconnect my presenter account.
Really? No, it seems to be back up.
Is it back up? Interesting. So you can see my screen.
Well, yeah.
Right,
let's see. There it is.
Yes, I believe that is sort of up to date.
Is that correct?
No.
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 Oh. Okay, well, that's easy enough.
We've come this far.
I can just delete it, and then I can just add it again. Oh my, wait. Oh, yeah. So, well, can I actually?
I have a number for you, if and when you would like it. Stand by. Is there more to say about All right, we're almost there. We're going to make this happen. Back up in action. Computers do freeze on occasion. We've talked about titles, sort of.
So I think now.
Ah, there we go. Beautiful. So I've.
Is it working though?
Sorry.
Is the mouse movement?
Yes, it is. Yeah, the mouse is moving in sync. So let's go ahead and look at basic properties here that we can change. And again, you can do this on any visual content. We're going to focus right now on this title. And we're going to go into the Effect Controls panel. And in doing so, you're going to notice that there are broad categories and then there are specific variables that we can control. Broad categories in terms of video effects include motion and opacity and then something called time remapping. So under motion, we get things like the position, and that's the X and Y coordinates of the object. If we click and drag these, we can change those values immediately, in real time. Put this wherever we want. We also have the scale, which, whoops, let's move that down a little bit, can of course be increased or decreased. If we open up the scale, we have this option here to deselect uniform scale. And now we can change the height and width independently if for some reason we want to.
Is bronchitis contagious?
I believe it is, yes. But I had to come in today. I'm sorry.
Well, yes.
Rotation. Rotation is another, that's a fan favorite. Rotation is
quite popular.
Quite popular, actually. Yeah. We can rotate this guy here. It's rotating in funny ways because, remember, we're changing properties here, but the title itself has its own properties. And so the text within the title is still up there in the corner. What I'm saying is if I change this and I make it go centered like that, and then I come back here, now I have to update everything on this side. But now, if I change the rotation, the anchor point is right in the center there. And so we can get this thing to rotate essentially on its own center axis. But we are not right now, and this is very important, we are not creating animations. We are simply changing the state of this entire graphic from start to finish. And now if I click through here, the graphic appears, and then it goes away. So this is where keyframing comes into the mix. We come to the beginning of the thing that we want to change. And we come back to the same spot, our Effect Controls panel, and we look at those same variables that we were just changing. But this time, we're going to do one critical thing differently, and that is we're going to turn on time mapping. The animation is going to be toggled on, and we're going to do that by clicking the stopwatch to the left of each one of the properties or variables that we want to control.
Yes, because keyframing is not difficult, or basic keyframing is not difficult, but it can be a tedious task. And if you don't know exactly what you're doing, then it's very easy to get confused.
A tedious task and one that can really become consuming as you try to get it just the way you want it. All right, so let's try a couple of simple things here. Let's say that what I really want to have happen is the text comes in and then it grows bigger and it kind of fades away as it's growing. That's just the creative vision that I have for this. So, two things we're going to change. We're going to change the scale, but we're going to do it in a uniform way. I don't want to make it more wide than tall, or vice versa. So we'll toggle that back on. We'll change the scale, and then we're also going to change the opacity. We're going to fade it out and make it transparent as time goes on. So because I know I want to do the scale, we'll start with that. I'm going to click on the stopwatch next to the scale, and that, in and of itself, merely clicking the stopwatch creates its keyframe. It's a little hard to see and it's halfway hidden, but there's a diamond right here on the track to the right. And that diamond represents the first keyframe. Now I'm going to move to the end of the text here, So I'm going to the final frame of the text, and I want to add a second keyframe to the end. So I have one at the beginning, one at the end. This time, to add that second keyframe, I'm going to click the Add Remove Keyframe option, which itself is a little diamond right here, but just to the left. So now I have two diamonds, and I can toggle between them using these arrows. That's the beginning and ending of that piece of text. And when I'm on the second keyframe, I can now change the zoom to something like that.
Oh. 4 people watching now.
4 people are watching.
So someone other than, so this may be actually someone in the class.
Well, it was bound to happen also. One of these days, the link would go public. And
Public? Do you think it's public?
well, it could be. It could be. It could be on the homepage of Reddit right now.
Oh,
The
my.
views are going to be popping in.
So this could be like, who is it? Is there a way to figure out in live who's watching?
So now we get that interpolation, that in-betweening, that tweening effect that we were describing. We only set
Tweenie,
2 values.
that was a phrase that was used in Flash.
Yes. Flash
Back in the
animations were
day.
created exactly the same way, actually. Adding keyframes, setting beginning and ending points, and then letting Flash, in that case, figure out what to do in
People
between.
still use that. People don't use Flash anymore.
Well, I think that they may still use Flash within certain niche applications. Facebook,
But HTML5 negated the need for Flash, correct?
in large measure, certainly
With the
with regard
video
to
tag?
There was a day when all online video was Adobe Flash, but that day
Yeah.
has passed. Thankfully, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I would say
Actually,
there are certain things that you still can do in Flash that would be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to do using simply JavaScript and HTML and CSS.
well, Flash is still updated for the Creative Cloud.
Yeah, although I think it has an expiration date now, 2020
Ah.
or something like that, 2022.
Oh,
All right, so we have
the
our
fourth
text
person left.
growing. Oh boy. And then the dejection sets in. What I also want to do, though, is change the opacity. And there's no reason why I can't have multiple layers of effects changing over time. So I'm going to move my playhead here in the effect controls, come down to the opacity, open it up so I can get into that property, click on the little icon here to add a keyframe. And then I'm going to scroll to the end, and I have to go back 1 frame to make sure I can see my text. I'm going to click to add a second keyframe. And I'm going to change the opacity from 100 all the way down to 0. And now, we take a look. All right. Well, I would say that's a lovely little effect. It's a bit silly, but it may be in keeping with the tone of the video here. So that's adding just a couple of different properties. Now, one of the things that you will notice happen is the playback really begins to lag in Premiere. When you start getting into effects, this is a thing. You got to start rendering. Rendering means you are actually processing and applying the effects that you create. You can still remove them. It's still non-destructive. But until you render them, Premiere is figuring out, as it goes, exactly how these effects should look. And that is extremely processor intensive. So even with my spiffy i7, thank you very much, processor,
Well,
we still get some slowdown, even on a simple animation like this.
yes, effects are very CPU intensive,
Very
regardless of the
CPU
computer,
intensive.
unless you have like a super Xeon with like solid state and lots
I
of
was
RAM.
pricing out the new iMac Pros.
Oh yeah, yeah, the ones that are like $10,000.
Well, if you go top of the line and you deck it all out, it's about 14,000.
yep, yep.
So
Rather extreme, it seems like.
It's a bit extreme, and yet it's a business expense, right?
Oh, are you
People need
thinking
fast
about getting
computers.
one?
All right, so That's a little thing here on keyframing. Now, couple of points. One is that, again, we can go in and we can change these keyframes. Click on a keyframe and then you can change the related settings on the property there. So my opacity goes from 0 to 100, or rather 100 to 0. I can change either or both of those. Another thing that we can do is add something called easing to our keyframes. Easing is great.
Easy ease.
Easy ease.
Easy ease. Ease in, ease out.
That's what we'll have to file away. You can add easing to your keyframes, and you can do one of two kinds of easing. You can ease in, and you can ease out.
Or you could do easy ease.
Or you can do easy ease. Yes.
Yes.
So,
and these are
do you have a personal
terms.
preference?
These are terms.
These are real terms, yes.
But it depends if you're in a hurry or if you're not.
All right. So if you're in a hurry, you go with the easy ease route.
Easy ease.
Just easy ease all the way.
All the way.
Otherwise, you can kind of decide, do you want to ease in or ease out? What do we mean by that? Well, this is changing the velocity of the effect over time. So, yes, we can go from 100 to 0 over time. Premiere will fill in the blanks.
But it's linear.
Beautiful thing. But it's linear. The change will be at the exact same rate each step along the way. If you ease in, the change becomes more rapid over time, and if you ease out, it becomes slower over time.
And sometimes it gets a little confusing. So sometimes easy ease.
Yeah. It does get a bit confusing because you can apply these effects to keyframes. And so when you think about, okay, are you on the first keyframe, are you easing in or out? What does it mean to ease out on the first keyframe?
Yeah, and then
the second
last one. Right.
So easy ease is just select it all, easy ease it, and it just adds a little bit of a fluid polish.
Right.
Let's just say polish. It just adds a bit of polish or fluidity to the animation. So I'm going to do that because this is definitely in need of some easing. I'm selecting both of my diamonds and then I'm control clicking on one of them, and goodness gracious, I don't have my easy ease. Is it because I selected two?
No, you didn't select both.
I did.
No, you didn't, it looks like.
I did not.
No. You got to select the both.
I did. Both keyframes.
No.
No?
No. Now it is. Now you did.
Yeah, but I don't have my easy ease. It's been taken away. I have to choose.
Oh, actually, I think that may be an After Effects, only in After Effects.
Ah.
But you can do the auto. What if you do the auto Bezier?
We can even see visually that the effect has changed here. Now, it's going to be hard to tell, quite frankly, until we render. And by hard, I mean impossible. So we have to render. And how do we do this magical rendering? This sounds like we have to go climb a mountain, say a chant,
gotta render,
make an offering. How do we render? What is the magic keyboard shortcut to render?
On mine, it's is your rendering selection? I think my keyboard shortcut on the PC is return enter or enter.
Just enter,
or one of those.
Yeah. So if you go to the sequence,
but it
you
should
got a
be
couple
up
of different
in
ways of doing it.
Sequence.
Render effects into out. Now,
or render selection.
Render selection, render into out. Keep doing it until a box shows up, basically. Also, you'll notice there's a yellow horizontal line traversing the entire timeline, and that line is telling us that probably there's going to be some slowdown. There's no guarantee that this is going to play back in real time. And so the hope here, when we're all done with this, is that yellow line will turn green, meaning that what we're seeing is very, very close to actual playback speed.
This could take a little while.
This could take a little time. Well, while that is
I think
cooking.
Now if you're using After Effects, it will actually do it in real time.
Do what in real time?
You'll see the easy ease.
Oh, yeah, I think that's the thing. It's an After Effects
Yes,
option.
yes.
You got a little confused there. Although rendering is a reality in After Effects as well.
Yes. Yeah,
Constantly
distinct, yes.
rendering.
Actually, After Effects, you're constantly rendering because you're doing RAM previews of everything. You're not actually playing anything back live.
Yeah.
Can be quite tedious sometimes. And After Effects, you need a really, really good computer.
You need a $14,000 iMac Pro if
Yeah.
you want to use After Effects.
Although it's getting better. Some of the 3D modeling programs like Blender or some other ones will do it live in real time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think with Premiere, if you press the right and left one frame at a time button and you hold it down, then it will do it in real time also. Yeah, it's and then also the resolution playback makes a difference. It looks like you're set to 1/4. So basically, you do need a fairly decent computer to do video editing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember one year someone tried to do it. It took video storytelling, and they were going to use a netbook.
A netbook.
Remember netbooks?
Yeah. Yeah.
These were like,
You have a netbook, don't you?
there is a, no, I have a Chromebook,
A Chromebook.
but there is a
Pardon me.
netbook right over there that we bought.
Oh, is that right? On the shelf?
No, over there for the teleprompter.
Oh, okay, yeah. To
and it's
power
dismal.
the teleprompter,
It's
yes.
the slowest thing in the world.
Yeah, yeah. They are
And-
bare bones computers.
Yes. And it was funny because, yeah, I think she actually ended up trying to do some editing.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
it was very strange.
I would say, though, that there is a big jump that happens when you get into the kinds of editing that we're talking about this week, applying effects,
yeah,
namely,
yeah.
where things really start to bog down. If you're
Yes.
talking about chopping up your footage and assembling stuff on a timeline,
Yeah.
you don't need that powerful.
Yeah, unless you're, and even then, if you're working with 4K, you're going to be using proxies for the most part.
So there are workarounds.
So there are workarounds, but no, you're right.
But these effects can be a real doozy. And it gets to a point, especially with After Effects, where it tries a person's patience. Because it's a 3-second effect that you want to apply, and it takes 30 minutes to render it.
Yeah. You really need you really want to try to get the best possible computer you can. And even then, there are certain minimum requirements with RAM and CPUs and, video cards and things like that.
And then particularly with After Effects, for me anyway, using After Effects is an event. Because first of all, I close everything else down on the
Yep.
computer. No other programs running. Even with Premiere, I'll have a bunch of stuff running in the background. And I feel like I can kind of get away with that. After Effects, nope. I'll shut my computer down, I'll fire it back up again, make sure nothing is open.
Yep.
I'll use CC Cleaner and clear out some junk. Say a prayer, and then launch After Effects.
Although the new updated version of After Effects is slightly better, slightly more usable. It is getting slightly better.
Well, perhaps we'll reach a point where After Effects becomes classic and mobile, and they have it so streamlined that you can run it
I'm
from
sure
your
that
phone
they will.
or from your tablet.
Lightroom has become much more snappier, but that's still a memory hog.
Yeah.
That's still quite slow on it, actually.
Tell us a little bit, because we're almost, well, just when you think it's almost done, the time increases. We're almost past this rendering process. Tell us a little bit about the next item on our list, which is audio adjustments, but specifically using the Essential Sound panel. And again, walk us through that big picture, and then
Well, the
we'll take a
Essential
look at it
Sound
here.
panel, one nice thing is that it's non-destructive. It's not like you're using the waveform monitor in Audition. But the Essential Sound Panel basically also gives you very step-by-step, in a nice discrete order, the steps that you should do to clean up your audio or work with your audio.
And there are a surprising number of choices when it comes to working with sound.
Oh yeah, it's actually, yes.
And
yes.
As we've talked about, I think we talked about it in this class, it was in your class, the order in which you apply effects matters. It makes a big difference.
Huge difference. Both for visual and audio effects, for both. Depending on which effect is rendered, and that order will change how the image looks or sounds. And it's like anything, color grading can get quite complex, can get very complex, and audio editing can get very complex. But the Essential Sound Panel has essentially made certain steps very easy.
Okay. And
where you don't even have to know what you're doing to a certain extent.
And the concept here is as I understand it, it starts with the idea that you have to be able to categorize your sound into a couple of broad categories or buckets of sound.
Yes.
And then once you've grouped them off, you apply effects to that group of sounds.
Well, yes. So you assign certain audio elements a particular type of category. So vocals would be dialogue, and you assign that your dialogue, your narration as dialogue, and then when you do that, the effects that go along with dialogue will appear, and you basically just go from top to bottom, and so one, there's a slider for clarity. And clarity is the compressor or the EQ. No, it's a compressor. And it basically just, you apply the slider, and you'll hear a distinct change. The audio will sound more, quote, clear. There's an EQ. But but the effects are still going on, but you don't necessarily have to know all the ins and outs of the effect. You just use the slider. So it makes it quite, I think that you may have rendered the entire timeline.
That would explain so much.
Because if there's frames, 22,000 frames, that little lower third could not be 22,000 frames.
That just, the math on that just does not work out.
The math is just not making sense.
But you know what? We're in too deep now.
Well, yeah, considering it's only 88%. But this is part of the joy of rendering. With video production, there's a lot of waiting. And photo production and photography, there's a lot of waiting.
So what does one do when one waits?
Well, one can get some coffee. Although I'm not drinking coffee anymore. I've gone a full week and a half without coffee.
Really?
Yes.
A week and a half?
I'm only doing tea and water.
And how do you feel?
A little better. I felt like I was getting pretty bad headaches, and now those headaches are not nearly as severe.
Well, that's a big improvement.
And I just felt like I was drinking coffee simply because I was drinking it because I felt like I, quote, needed it, not because I wanted to. I was like, I don't even want to drink this coffee, but I felt like it was such a ritual of drinking it.
Yeah. So this could be a permanent change.
Well, yeah. It actually, yeah.
Now,
and I had coffee about one time.
You mean in this past week and a half
in this
period?
past week and a half.
Uh-huh.
No, it's been 2 weeks now. And when I had the coffee, I really did not like it that much.
Ah,
But coffee is like a Black Crow.
yeah.
The cheapest thing there is coffee.
It is the default drink, isn't it?
So now I've gone, I'll go and get coffee and not even drink it. Because you got to buy something.
Yeah.
You can't go to a coffee shop
Yeah,
and not
yeah,
buy
yeah.
something.
To pay the piper, yes. So the real question here, though, is: are we talking about green tea, black tea,
It just
oolong
depends.
tea?
Various. So I have some. This is apricot green tea.
Ah,
So from the grind,
okay.
which closes at 3 on Fridays now.
Ah. Was that an iced tea, or you moved it into a iced tea? Because switching to tea is one thing, but if you're going from hot tea to iced tea,
I do both. I had both.
well, I didn't realize that these changes were
Yes.
underway.
In addition to, well, I'm not teetotaling completely, but I definitely have reduced my consumption of alcohol considerably.
Uh-huh.
Now, that does not sound very good. That probably makes me sound like an alcoholic, which I am not.
Well, I wouldn't say that necessarily.
What, that I'm not a...
I would say that it sounds bad necessarily.
Well, yeah. But I think I will probably do some slight imbibing in Chicago.
In Chicago, in the Palmer House,
Yes.
or
I looked
the
at the
surrounding area.
bar area. It looks quite swanky.
Yeah.
And you were there, right?
Yes, I was. Yes,
It
I
looks
was.
very hip, upscale, and like locale or something. Anyways, back to audio. So people
Guess
are
what?
probably...
It's done. It's
It
done.
is?
It's all green. And that is the
So-
joy of rendering when it is finally
So-
complete.
Okay, so just to let people know, the entire sequence was rendered.
The entire thing. And if I pop out there a second, I don't know, 12 minutes and 24 seconds. All right, so let's get some different sound in play here so we can put this essential sound panel. I don't know if I peaked, but
No, because I have your compressor, and I have the ratio to about a 15:1, which is essentially a limiter.
so let me bring a few different sounds into play.
So
here.
there's some John Travolta there, and there are some sound effects too.
Yes, yes. I'm going to solo this track and see what we've got here. I just clicked a couple of random. We'll turn this up. That sounds like some
Keyboard
tip tapping on the
typing.
keyboard. Yep. And then here we have some door sound effects.
Yes. No, those are keys. Putting keys in the door.
Keys in the door.
Mhm.
Okay, so now
And then some verbal instructions accompanying that. Now the John Travolta, I think that one I need to pull back up. That was
an
in here.
MP4.
Yeah, so we'll do the drag audio only trick on that and get a little music underneath. All right, so just to come to this section now, we have, and we're doing this roughly, but there's audio from the camera, there's some sound effects, and there's some music.
I would like to. I heard Stan and technique you from Ozone technique. Let's see. I wonder if this is
All right, so I don't know what's going on there.
It's a cacophony of sounds.
Yes, a cacophony of
cacophony
audio
of
that needs to be tamed
audio.
through the essential sound panel. So we got to go to our window, and essential sound is the ticket here. It opens up on the right-hand side. It is, gosh darn it, a bona fide panel over there on the right-hand side. And now, so we have to assign our audio to these categories, right?
You know, it is important to assign the correct audio to the correct categories. That is critical.
That is all bets are off if you mislabel your audio.
Exactly.
So be sure that you are clear on the difference, for example, between a sound effect and ambiance.
And there is a slight difference.
How would you define that difference?
Well, ambiance would be maybe birds chirping, and a sound effect may be something like a gunshot.
Okay. The critical difference being...
Or room tone could be ambiance, or well, the general difference. I mean, a sound effect is generally something that was like a boom pole hitting the door or something like that.
So I think of it as a moment in time. Something happens, you hear it.
Yeah.
Ambient sound, and it could be birds, it could be room noise. It's something
Trains
that's just kind
in the
of
background.
trains.
Yeah.
Yep. Trains.
Because I was looking at the tram or trolley in Saturday Night Fever.
It tends to sit lower in the mix in the sense that it's not quite as dominant, and it's not something that just happens and it's gone. There's the sound of trains over time.
Kind of continuous.
Continuous. It's continuous, as opposed to your sound effect, which is it happens and it's done. So we've got that dialogue and music. That's pretty clear. So I am going to click on my music.
And also, in the first stage, it's important to... I've noticed that you're very careful about putting your different audio elements that are the same on their own tracks.
Yeah, that simplifies things quite a bit, doesn't it? Because if you know that all of your music is on track 3, then you know.
Yes.
All right, so I'm selecting something, and then I'm clicking on the category that matches to assign it to that category.
And if you have multiple instances of music, you would need to select all of those clips first.
And if I forgot one or added one later, could I add it in?
Do it again.
Do it again. Yeah.
Because the first thing you do is loudness, set the loudness, normalization between all the different, if you have multiple clips. Or if you have one clip.
So now I've assigned all of my clips to these various categories. I used every one except for the ambient category. And now I have dialogue, and I can come in and begin making some changes. There are presets that we can pick from. I feel like podcast voice is a pretty reliable preset. Are there others that you have found to be worth our consideration?
See the screen, because there's a delay. Plus,
is there a bit of pixelation at play?
No, the podcast voice is quite a common one.
And so if we pick that, our options below, including clarity and EQ, automatically shift around a bit. And those particular settings are applied. So then we can come into our other options like music, and we have presets there as well. Balanced background music. I suppose that's a pretty common preset.
But you want to set the loudness.
Which we can do down below here. So we have
at the top.
Oh, up at the top.
That's the first thing.
Oh, there it is.
You always want to set that.
Auto match. Automatically match clips to a standard average loudness.
So if you have multiple clips, then it will match all those clips to a certain loudness units, or LUFS.
Okay.
So this is quite interesting because there's this new loudness standard, which is different from decibels, a dB, or the old RMS way of analyzing the loudness. So the new LUFS is new way of measuring the loudness, and it's based on how we perceive loudness. So that's what that LUFS as opposed to dBFS. So decibels to dB to this LU, or loudness unit.
Now, even though we've set that, we still may want to play with the overall volume.
Oh, yes,
of the
yes.
music.
But what's great
Particularly if
with
it's
this
underneath
essential sound is you
dialogue.
just go from the top to bottom.
Yeah. All right. So we've set the loudness, and then we have duration, which is what it is. We keep going down clip volume, and then we have this level here that we can adjust.
And the great thing about that is that that's non-destructive.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about,
Rises from the bosom.
Let's,
my, that was loud.
A little blurry, but they look cool.
so,
Important you need to
and we can preview this in real time.
Yes.
with the sunglasses inside.
So you don't have to worry about using that little line and trying to drag that line down.
Yeah. Which is an infuriating process.
Infuriating, yes.
It never gives you the granularity that you really want. That
Exactly.
fine-tuned control. This is so much easier. And in general, we recommend going easy on the music levels. Often we hear mixes where the music is just too loud. We've talked about
Yes.
it.
Well, the great thing about it is the preset for the loudness for the music is going to be lower when you normalize the loudness. It's going to be lower than the loudness for the dialogue.
Yeah.
So it'll automatically be lower.
Yeah.
You still would want to, may need to apply keyframes. Now, the auto ducking, which is that new feature in the updated version, is in this essential sound panel also,
Okay.
which makes it incredibly quick and easy.
Yeah.
If you just want to do a down and dirty
Yeah.
audio mix, which, because, yes.
So we have slightly different options depending on what category of sound we're working with.
And that's why it's so crucial to assign the audio elements to the correct category.
And I do want to reiterate, as you've pointed out very correctly, these are non-destructive changes that we're making. And so we can always go back in and readjust how we've set everything. But the idea here is you go beyond doing it on a clip-by-clip basis, which was kind of the old paradigm, and you change things on a category-by-category basis. Assign them to the right category, and you're off to the races. All right, let's talk a little bit about applying video effects and transitions, and we'll wrap things up today and this week with a quick look at Lumetri Color, which is a specific video effect that we can apply. So far, in terms of what we've done through the Effect Controls panel, and we were focusing on that title that we created, but again, we could add, for example, this video to our Effect Controls panel by clicking on it in the timeline, and then we can change the scale of the video itself, or any of these other properties. Or we can add additional properties to our list of options by adding effects to this particular video clip. And we can do that by coming into the lower left-hand corner of the screen, going to Effects, and we have a few different categories, including video effects and subcategories of effects there. So
And
we
one
can
of
go
the
into
things,
these.
like in the essential sound, when you click on clarity and EQ, the effects will show up in the effects control. So you have more, if you want to fine tune those effects, you'll see the effects in the effects control.
There we go. So there's our vocal enhancer, graphic equalizer, dynamics processing, and then we can click on any of these and it brings us to a additional screen. So many ways of fine tuning.
Yes.
All right, so let's say we wanted to do, oh, I don't know, maybe how about a distort effect? And we can do a twirl maybe. We'll click and drag it onto our video here on the timeline, and then if we scroll up in the video effects panel, we're going to have twirl as an additional option, and depending on the effect, you may have one or multiple things that you can control. In this case, we have angle and twirl radius and center as well, and we can move these values around to decrease or increase the amount of the effect and exactly how the effect ends up being applied. So there are all kinds of effects, some of them more practical than others. There are lighting effects that are also really interesting that we can apply. If we want to remove one of these, we can just click on it here and hit delete and it's gone. We could try a different kind of effect. So for example, we could go into adjust, and we can add a lighting effect here to our video. And then we have these virtual lights that we can control, all kinds of settings that we can change about them. We can affect the exposure, the placement, the diffusion of the light. All these things can be changed. And again, if we're not happy, we can reset it or remove it altogether. That's the essence of working with effects. There are audio effects as well. Those are applied automatically through the Essential Sound panel, or you could manually apply audio effects as you wanted to. And then we also have transitions, both audio and video transitions. These are applied to the cut points in between clips. So right now we have just one big long video here. And as you can see, that effect, that lighting effect, has been applied to the whole thing. If I remove it, it's removed from the whole thing. So let's go ahead and just knock it out there for a moment. There we go. If I were to cut this, I would have a cut point where I can add an effect. So I could go into my video transitions here, for example. Let's slide these guys over and bump them up against each other.
What about a Star Wars wipe?
The old familiar Star Wars wipe. Let's give it a try. So we'll take the wipe, we'll drop it on the cut here. As I zoom in, the transition becomes a visual element that we can elongate or shorten on the timeline here. And then we can pop out and see how it looks. So that works very well, I would say. That's a nice little wipe effect there. Bring us into a new scene.
Popularized by George Lucas. And I think he used it multiple times in every one of his movies. Every one of his Star Wars movies. In fact, didn't you do, you showed a video about the number of wipes in one of your classes?
Yeah, I think correctly. There was one of these supercuts where it's a video of nothing but the wipes from all the Star Wars
Nothing but the wipes.
And it's about 20 minutes long. Nothing but wipes.
As opposed to screen wipes or other types of wipes. Cheers.
Yes, as opposed to that. And finally, we were going to talk about color a little bit.
Yes. Color.
Lumetri color.
No, actually, color grading or color correction?
Well, what's the difference?
Well, you know what? Maybe why don't we go back to? You want to go back to you since we've?
Oh, certainly. I don't know if I'm presentable anymore. Hello. I was definitely slouching there. Well, I apologize.
Well, you are sick, so that's okay.
Yes, I'm conserving energy.
Just let everyone know that you have bronchitis.
Don't get too close.
But you are coming in and doing the videos.
I wouldn't
despite the bronchitis.
In spite of it. I'm here. Hanging on by a thread.
So, color correction versus color grading. What is the difference?
What is the difference? These are two terms to know and be familiar with. Even if you don't find yourself doing a lot of it, you want to know the role it plays in the process. And we talk sometimes about how there are many roles when you get into big league productions. People are doing very specific tasks. And you have colorists.
We have a fourth person returned.
Back to 4, that's right.
Back to 4. That is exciting. Maybe it was the discussion of wipes that brought them back.
Called them back, yes. That siren song of wipes. Colorists are highly skilled individuals.
Yes.
Who do video post-production work, but they do a very specific kind of post-production work, which is working in this realm of color. Using
DaVinci Resolve mostly. Although DaVinci Resolve now, there's a DaVinci Resolve 15, which actually is becoming a fairly complete video editing suite also.
Is this the one announced at the NAB?
Yes, actually the NAB, for those that are wondering what the NAB is, that's the National Broadcasters Association. Probably one of the biggest events related to for photographers, videographers, well, not photographers, but videographers and other audio enthusiasts or professionals.
A lot of new gear gets announced at the show.
For example, they announced the new Blackmagic Pocket camera also, but this DaVinci Resolve 15, they've also incorporated Fusion, which is Blackmagic's version of After Effects, where you can do compositing. And they also added audio editing and other basic editing features.
Giving Premiere a run for its money.
Well, many people are going over.
Yeah.
Some people are going over.
Yeah.
Because it's not totally complete. I mean, Adobe still has things like Photoshop and Lightroom and other to make it all a complete ecosystem.
Yeah.
But colorists have, for a long, traditionally have used DaVinci Resolve.
Tool of choice.
The tool of choice, yes. In fact, I think the Amanda, who's going to be the speaker next week, she uses DaVinci Resolve.
Well.
And I should really learn DaVinci Resolve also.
And if I'm not mistaken, a key component of DaVinci Resolve that makes a cameo appearance in Premiere is this idea of a color wheel.
Yes. Well, but what I think the original question was, what is the difference between color correction and color grading?
Yes. That was the question, you're right.
Because there is an important distinction.
Yeah.
So would you like to talk about the distinction?
Well, in my way of looking at it, which I think is reasonable enough, I always think of it in terms of, are you fixing something or are you enhancing something? Are you taking care of a problem or are you adding an effect that makes something more interesting or more otherworldly? It depends on what you're going for. So color correction is about fixing problems with exposure, mismatched skin tones across shots. Color grading is about applying a creative level of work where, well, there are color palettes that you're trying to emphasize. So much can be communicated through color in terms of emotion.
That's
and so
the psychology behind color is quite extensive.
So color grading is about tapping into all of that.
Yes.
Creating an impression, an effect.
But you want to have a baseline first and to correct any issues.
Yeah. Which could be distracting or just reveal a problem with how the footage was captured.
And that's why people use gray cards and white cards and
so that we have
black
reference
cards.
points and we know how things are supposed to be. If we know what white is supposed to look like, or mid-tone gray, we can start with that and we can work with that and we can tell Premiere that and use that as a baseline.
And some directors have distinct uses of color. In fact, there's been many academic articles recently written about Wes Anderson and his use of color palettes. Actually.
And when we were looking at that website, I can't remember the name of it offhand.
Oh,
but
the one that showed the individual frames?
yeah, individual frame.
Yes.
It's quite interesting because you can browse through that and see the color palette shifting
Yes.
as the film progresses.
So people may at a certain point hear terms like LUTs or lookup tables,
Yeah.
which is a term that's used within color grading.
Yeah.
And there's different types of LUTs. Some actually are used to for log recording, to apply a LUT to something to make it look more like a Rec 709 or other color spaces. And then there are LUTs that have specific give color palettes. But that's actually a slightly advanced topic, which may be a little too much right now. So,
We could think of them perhaps somewhat akin to presets.
yes.
Presets that could be applied to footage, and then it just changes the overall appearance.
Yes.
For what we're going to show you today, we want to introduce you to the effect called Lumetri color, which is one avenue into this whole world of color correction and color grading.
And actually, as I look on the screen on your computer, I see that there is a shot which actually is probably in need of some exposure, in need of the Lumetri panel.
I would say so. By happenstance, by sheer bloody luck, I think we've ended up on a frame here.
Because I distinctly remember when I did this,
Yeah.
I had the camera set to manual
Uh-huh.
exposure as opposed to auto exposure. So when I went outside, and I had the color temperature set to tungsten as opposed to auto. So
So that
What?
explains
That's
a lot about what we're seeing here, because we
quite
had
a-
just gone outside.
quite a surreptitious event
My
of
goodness.
events.
Almost as though we planned it, but not quite.
Well, I think.
I'm going to click and drag Lumetri
So,
color.
should I go back to the
Oh,
computer?
please. Yes, I'm doing something very interesting right here. Please
we
join
go.
me and examine
Find the right mouse, because I have the
display.
3 mice here.
Goes. And
All
I'm
these
going to drop
mice
this
running
effect.
around.
There we go.
There it
I'm
is.
simply clicking and dragging Lumetri color onto this clip. And nothing will change, because nothing changes when you add effects to your footage.
You don't
That's it.
even actually have to drag Lumetri color onto it,
This is a good point.
because it will automatically be activated when you select a clip.
Because I can go into Lumetri color as a panel,
Yes.
which is an important point, and this is a better way of doing it, actually. You can access Lumetri color from the effect controls. I've removed it, so it's not on the list anymore, but doing it the way that I just was, you could get to it from effect controls, but it's a little clunky going through the many options that Lumetri color offers. It's better to do it through its dedicated panel, which is kind of like the Essential Sound panel, where it's a very step-by-step process from top to bottom. And so we'll do it from here. Wow.
Now, one other thing that's important to, and this is a slightly advanced topic, but if one may notice in the Lumetri color panel, we have the clip 20180 whatever
Yeah.
that is in blue, and
Yep.
that's the active clip.
Yep.
And then you have the master 20 whatever it is.
Yeah.
So in the updated version, well, actually this about a year ago or so, you can apply effects both to clip instances in your timeline and to the master clip in the source panel.
Uh-huh.
So it is something to consider and to be aware of. So the master clip is actually the master clip that's in the project panel that you would show up in the source panel.
Okay.
So it's a way of applying.
So I can
an
toggle
effect.
between the two here. No, I'm doing something else when I do that.
Well,
Toggle between like.
you would
Interesting.
if you, because instead of having to apply all these effects, lumetri color effects, each individual in every instance
Yeah.
in your timeline. For example, if you want to do basic color correction, you can just apply the lumetri color and use the master, and then that will appear in every instance.
Uh-huh.
If you want to do like color correction,
Yeah, very handy. And so just clicking to toggle does the trick. So I can.
it is an important thing to be aware of,
Uh-huh.
actually.
Yeah, and a big difference, right? Because I'm either changing every
Oh, it's
instance or that particular instance.
Right, exactly. Yes, yes. And actually, with the split screen effect, when you go, if you right on the edit point, you can actually see right on the edit, you can see the difference
Yep.
between possibly properly exposed image with the correct color temperature,
Yep.
and then one that is overexposed with the incorrect color temperature.
Right. Right.
But this Pierre person was so distracting that it was I got just completely discombobulated.
I can imagine. I can definitely see that happening. But fear not, we do have some remedies in
Yes.
store through the Lumetri Color panel here. And you'll notice that we have, like we did with the Sound Designer, Essential Sound Designer, different categories here. In this case, basic correction. This is kind of like our color correction versus creative, which we could think of a bit more as far as color grading is concerned. And we can do color wheels and vignettes and a bunch of other things, curves as well.
And secondary color correction.
Secondary color correction, HSL, secondary. But from within our basic correction, we can fix the color temperature. And we can do that a few different ways. Now, if we had used a gray card, all right, we had a white card, we could click on this little eyedropper and then click on that card and tell Premiere that's gray or that's white. We did not, I don't think, did we use that?
Would you like to show it?
We can show what that looks like. There's a couple of different form factors of these fellows.
Let me switch.
You got the card version,
Let me switch over to.
and then you also have, oh, this guy here. So, boop, boop, boop. Hold this up in front of your subject, have the subject hold it for a few seconds, record this, and you're getting white, gray, and black. This gets captured, it's in Premiere, and now we can eyedrop on this and say, this is white. And if Premiere knows what white is supposed to be, with a fair degree of accuracy, it can automatically adjust both the temperature and the tint to correctly balance out.
So I'm going
color.
to switch back to the computer.
All right, back to the computer we go. In this particular case, we don't have that working to our advantage, but we can come in and simply.
But we can say that now that shot looks a lot rather cool.
We can definitely say it looks cool. We need more warmth in the shot just to get it
And
to look normal.
Cool, not as being cool, but cool as in a
Ice cold.
blue
Yeah,
color
a higher
temperature.
color temperature.
Higher color.
So if we slide the temperature over to the right here, eventually we start to notice that it does really change the overall temperature there. We can do it that way. We also have the tint, which we can bring in that direction as well, which also warms it up.
And tint, I've found that you really don't change that much.
So that's some pretty significant changes there. I believe if we select that, yeah, we can turn it off and on, which is kind of helpful. You can toggle between the original and the changed. See the difference. Now, the trouble here is not only do we have this color issue, but there's also an exposure issue.
So by exposure, there's an important distinction between exposure and white balance. And what is that distinction?
Well, in one case, we're talking about the color temperature, and in the other case, we're talking about the intensity of light. Not talking about color at all, actually, but just how much light is in the shot, and is it the appropriate amount of light?
So the tone sliders relate strictly to the luminance or exposure being the brightness values of the light without any regard to color, which is an important distinction.
Right. So we could increase the exposure, which would make the shot even more blown out, perhaps only helpful if we were going for some special effect. Or we can bring it in the other direction, which will actually return a little bit of detail to the shot.
But what's great is you can target the individual brightness areas on the histogram with the highlights, shadows, blacks, and white sliders.
Which gives us much more control over how these effects are applied. So let me reset both of these, and let's take a look at how that would work. So with highlights, you can bring down the highlights. Now that has a big impact on the brightest parts of the frame and little to no impact on the darker parts, unlike exposure, which is something applied across the board. Shadow naturally has a bigger impact on the darker parts of the shot. And then whites and blacks. So again, the original and the...
So, and this may be this is a more advanced topic, but at some point, if one wanted to know exactly how that was being, how the image was being affected, one could look at the scopes, look at your waveform, your vector scope, and your other scopes to see the changing distribution of pixels.
So then we can go into our creative tab, and we have these different looks that we can choose from, which are very much like lookup tables.
Yes.
And many of these are named after classic film stocks. And if we click on one of these, it's going to apply a range of effects to the footage, and we can easily toggle between them and see different variations. Even easier if we just click on the arrows here. We can go monochrome. And then we can apply additional changes there, changing the intensity and the saturation and the vibrance and so on of that particular effect. We can get even more nuanced and granular in how we apply these changes by going into RGB curves and picking a particular color here, red for example, and then dragging the curve to change the amount of that color.
Which can be quite tricky. So that's definitely an advanced topic, using the RGB curves.
And then we have our hue and saturation curve.
This hue and saturation curves, actually, I tend to use, because you can target a specific hue and you can increase or decrease the saturation. which actually is somewhat helpful sometimes.
So let's go with sort of the greenish blue. So we can draw these interesting shapes here to change.
But what's nice, if like the green in the shot is a little too saturated, you can target just the green and decrease the saturation.
Just like that.
Well, but then you have to bring up the others. And a little goes a long way, so.
So it's with and without the curves there.
But it's all non-destructive, so you can just turn it off or on.
Here are our color wheels.
Now, the color wheels are what you would see in DaVinci Resolve. And the color wheels, you have your lift, gamma, and gain. So you have your lift being the highlights, your gamma being your midtones, and then your gain. No, the lift is the darks, and then the gamma mid, and then the gain is highlights. So you can change the hue with the wheel inside by hovering inside, and then you can change the hue of like the shadows by moving that little thing around. And then on the left-hand side of each of the wheel, that will adjust your luminosity of the midtones, for example.
All right. So I'm emphasizing or de-emphasizing certain colors, but I'm doing it in a more nuanced way by targeting just a certain range of,
yes,
in terms of luminosity.
Or, right. And so that wheel is essentially the same type of wheel you would see in a vector scope. So you can increase and decrease the saturation in addition to changing the hues of the midtones, for example.
All right.
But these are the wheels that you would find. These are the wheels, the three wheels that color graders, colorists use.
Yeah.
And they actually have these control panels that have like wheels where you can use these like round wheels.
Yeah.
And get really super fine control.
What we mean by, you'll hear the phrase sometimes, three-way color correction.
Yes.
The three ways being the shadows, midtones, and highlights. All right, well, perhaps that's enough.
Well, what about a vignette? Vignettes are very easy
Vignette.
and popular.
Let's talk about vignette. So we can open up vignette. And again, by default, we have to change these fellows around here to see a difference. And you can see, as I add the vignette, the edges of the frame become a bit darker. I can feather this if I want it to be, the transition point to be more or less extreme. If you start with the feather all the way down, you can actually see a little bit easier what exactly is happening here as you change these other controls. And then based on that, once you've got everything kind of set, you can change your feather. And that's without and with the little vignette there. So that gives it a really kind of polished look as well.
Yeah, it's very easy to do, and it's quite help to center the attention of the viewer away from the edges of the frame.
Yeah. All right. So there we have it. We did Lumetri color. We talked about video transitions and effects, audio adjustments via the Essential Sound panel.
Go back to you?
Sure. I'm still recovering, but welcome back. Keyframing. We talked about keyframing, and yes, we did. We talked about titles as well. There are many topics we were unable to get into with Adobe Premiere because it is a fairly powerful program, constantly updating and adding new features into the mix.
Quite deep.
Quite deep.
But I would argue that the being able to do the basics is fairly easy to pick up.
I think so.
As I think is shown by the face-to-face classes. People are able to pick it up pretty quickly.
And make bona fide movies.
Yeah, yeah.
And the thing about Premiere, I think, is you want to know the basic terrain. And that's what we've tried to show you these last few weeks. But when it comes to learning additional features, I really think it's important to do it on an as-needed basis. Meaning, you want a certain effect. You have a vision in your mind, and then you learn how to do it in Premiere.
You know, the fourth person is still on.
All this time.
All this time. Oh, now the fourth person has dropped away.
Well, isn't
Back to 3 people.
Sweet.
Hmm.
Well, we're not quite, we're done. We are done. I was going to say we're not quite done. We're not quite done big picture because we're going to come back one more time next week and talk about some odds and ends.
Odds and ends.
Bigger picture issues around digital video production. Video production specifically, but we'll also talk about audio and photos and kind of put it all together next week. But we're rounding the end. We're getting close. Any parting thoughts, Professor Campbell, as we prepare to pack our bags and head off into the great unknown?
No, I cannot think of anything at this point.
In that case,
so I'm going to cut to the outro.
And until next time.
Wait, let me just make sure it's not set to remove.
We don't want any looping incidents, I'll tell you that much. And by all means, do not play the intro.
Okay, so
Please.
So here we go.
There we go.